All right, time to talk about female serial killers. So, women are not often viewed by the public as killers, and this especially holds true for serial killers. The data tells us that when women do kill, it's often in defense and in domestic conflicts. Those who are serial killers may be even less likely to arouse any suspicion because we don't think of women as being capable of this. They're almost invisible to the public. Now, existing serial killer typologies are not really um, adequate for us understanding female serial killers. They tend to be quiet. They're just as lethal as male killers, but we're rarely aware of them being in our midst. We don't have any dominant image of a female serial killer. We still tend to conceptualize serial killing according to views of male serial killers. And we tend to believe that real serial killers use male methods of killing. So looking at Hickey's data from 2004 to 2014, there was 21 female serial killers, and they were about 8% of the serial killers in the sample. Um, 57% of them were involved in team cases, so they had a partner. Um, Overwhelmingly, these killers were white, 95% of them. Their average age at first killing was 39, and their average age when they were actually caught is 44. They spent about 6 years killing, and their victims were anywhere between 65 and 81 victims. Almost 30% of them killed all their victims in the same year. Now, in terms of method of killing, we still have the most popular method being poisoning, beating, strangling, stabbing, shooting, that combination. That's a little over a quarter. Another quarter is shooting only, about 20% poison only, and about 20% strangling or smothering only. In terms of who their victims are, overwhelmingly their victims are adults. Adults, they have about 3 to 4 victims on average. 43% kill strangers only. They About half of them killed men and women, and about a quarter of them involved more than one state. Now, probably the serial killer that comes to mind when we think about female serial killers is Eileen Wuornos. And she was linked to killing 7 men with a gun. And she's quickly labeled the nation's first serial killer, but this is incorrect. She's not the first serial killer. She's actually an anomaly in terms of what female serial killers are like, because she is much more like a male serial killer. Now, about 10% of the killers in Hickey's study started killing between 1826 and 1899. The remaining 90%, so most of them, start after 1900, with about 75% of them starting after 1950. Now, this doesn't necessarily mean that there weren't as many active serial killers prior to this. This can really have to do with improved methods for police investigation and reporting and media attention. Many female serial killers continued their murders for several years before being apprehended. And here we can see some data in terms of time periods, how many cases there were, the number of cases, etc. Now, very few of these women were found to have criminal histories or criminal careers. And unlike the dramatic rise that we saw, that increase in Black serial killers over the past 15 years, Black male serial killers, we don't really see this for Black women. They rarely engage in serial murder. Most are unemployed or did not list an occupation. Now, female serial offenders are more likely to choose family members as victims, but since 1975, there has been an increase in strangers. So, about a third have killed at least one stranger, and a quarter killed only strangers. In the cases of female serial killers who do act alone, patients in hospitals, nursing homes, and other care facilities tend to be their preferred victims. When family members were victims, husbands are overwhelmingly the primary target. And here we can see that similar preference for victims in terms of strangers, families, and then acquaintances that we see with male killers, and then some more specifics within each of those groups. Now, female offenders do appear to have age-specific groups of victims. So about 20% killed children only, and about a third killed adults only. In terms of their mobility, traveling serial killers are almost exclusively male. So only about a fifth of female serial killers travel. Nearly half are local killers, and the rest are place-specific killers, right? So this kind of makes sense with um, women dominating the healthcare fields, right? And those healthcare serial killers. So some common locations are nursing homes and hospitals, and then of course private homes. Female offenders were more likely to use poisons at least some of the time to kill their victims. And what they used had to do with what was available readily during the time period. So, for hundreds of years, arsenic is a really popular poison to use for killing folks. In the 1800s, it could be bought at any chemist shop. It's commonly used by women to improve their complexion, nearly undetectable in hot food and drinks, but it's a very gruesome manner of death. So, there's a lot of vomiting, intense pain, and today it's not as readily available, although it is available in pesticides. Nearly half of the killers, the female killers in this survey, this study used some type of poison. Now, most had an accomplice who used violent means to kill the majority of their victims, and about a third used a combination of methods. Female offenders almost exclusively kill victims who are low facilitation. Women in this study, with few exceptions, were not sexually motivated. Money seems to be the most common motivator for female serial killers. The other time that we might see women kill is when there's a life threatening situation that affects their emotional or physical well being. And here we see that breakdown again of methods and motives. Now, biographical data, right? So people's background, their family background, for female serial killers does show some instances of broken homes, displaced children, other traumatic experiences, similar to what we saw in the backgrounds of men. But they don't have appeared to experience more traumas as children than any other type of criminal or even non criminals. Now, Hutton and Woodworth, in their 2014 study of violent female youth, looked at instrumental violence, psychopathy, and offense characteristics. And they found that in order to better treat young females, we need a more tailored approach based on the types of crimes that they commit. So we need much more research, especially most of our research about psychopathy has been done on men, and we don't know if it presents the same way in women. So we need more research here. So some things that we do see in gender-based psychopathy for women is persistent relationship difficulties, dishonesty, frequent acts of theft, frequent sexual conduct. By the way, women are always being tagged as being promiscuous, and as that being like a precursor to crime, but we don't see that talked about with men. Superficial interest in others, impaired grasp of reality, damaged sense of self, lack of introspection, suicidal and self harm behaviors. If you look at this list, and it's going to continue on to the next page, compared to what the PCLR looks like for men, this is just sort of a hodgepodge of like, hey, women are having a tough time, right? This is not very sound. We need more research here. Um, Things that we do see that are similar, right? Lack of insight and understanding the motivation of others. Um, that's kind of common for both for psychopaths. Frustration, need for attention and admiration, hysteria. Ugh, you know that this is really only ever when only women are characterized as hysterical. Okay, so what happens to female offenders? They don't instill the same fear as male offenders, so we don't really think of them as being as dangerous, even though they are. And so they often get this deferential treatment that women are sometimes subject to in the court system. So when women engage in crime that's not ladylike, right? So things like prostitution, if women are being kind of mouthy, um, they're not following into prescribed gender roles, we see them get harsh treatment in court, but otherwise they kind of get this chivalrous treatment. We as a country are less willing to execute women. If you look at the Jodi Arias case, right, it's pretty clear that she killed her ex-boyfriend, but I think she had to have 3 penalty phase trials, and then they sentenced her to life without parole. So the jury was not willing to sentence her to death. So about 20% of female offenders were sentenced to death, but only 2 of them have been executed. 71% received life in prison or were sent to psychiatric institutions. And so just to finish up, here's that formal breakdown. 5 never apprehended, 4 killed before they were apprehended, 5 in a psych institution, 66 that got life, 19 that were sent to death row, but remember, only 2 were executed.